Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just broke down all of the updates you need to know in the world of recruiting. So many things happening in the recruiting trail right now, and a couple of flips that could be coming up for some big time quarterbacks in this class. But let's get into some conference questions. Let's break down the ACC today. I believe 5 questions here that I want to break down for you guys and get into all the details as we head into this ACC season. But let's start over at Clemson. And my big question is, can Clemson be the team that they used to be? Can they be the team that is at the very top of this conference, is scary to essentially everyone in this conference, and is dominating from the front? And overall, when you look back at those 2010, those dominant programs those dominant teams that Clemson had for so long, it was defined by a couple of things. When you look at the outside wide receiver play, it was always elite. A quarterback that is among the best in the country, and then line of scrimmage physicality. That was what they kind of built that program off of, and it feels like this year they have it a little bit more than they've ever or they've had at least in a while. When you talk about bringing in guys like Bryant Wesco and TJ Moore into that program, those are two very, very talented kids that immediately elevate that room, immediately give them more talent, more ability to work with, and I think regardless of how I feel, putting a freshman at the very forefront of your offense, I think if they're talented enough, right? They definitely have the ability to make that work, and I think they're going to be a really dominant group this upcoming year and a little bit closer to what we remember back in 2016, 2018 when we talk about those Clemson wide receivers. The line of scrimmages are back to being dominant in my mind. The D-line looks really, really solid, especially better than it did last year. Definitely a really, really good group, and Peter Woods is someone that I think is just going to be an absolute monster this year. And then the O-line is much more solid this upcoming year. They have two really, really good tackles, and I think they're going to be more than fine, especially with Matt Luke coaching that position. I think they're going to make plenty of plays at the offensive line position and be one of those groups across the ACC that can dictate the momentum, dictate the line of scrimmage better than pretty much anyone else. But then there's the biggest piece, and it's Cade Klubnik. And I've kind of come around on Cade Klubnik a little bit. I think he's one of the more underestimated quarterbacks in the entire country. I think when you look at this kid's tools, he can run the ball. He can throw the ball pretty much wherever you need him to throw it. Now, the question is, can he do that consistently? That's obviously the big-time question, which with pretty much every quarterback in the ACC I've found out, but overall, this is definitely one that might take the cake in this one. But when you talk about all of the things that he's dealt with since he's gotten into Clemson, he came in as a freshman, started in spurts as that DJU craziness was going on at Clemson. Then you immediately lose your OC, who he probably should have lost, to be totally fair, but it doesn't change. You had to learn an entirely new offense that absolutely can be quarterback friendly, but it's not easy to run by any means. So Cade Klubnik can definitely take that step forward, and with the talent he has, there is a chance for this kid to be special and lead Clemson right back to where they want to be. So there's going to be plenty of teams that they have to run through to get there, but I really like this team, and I think they're a little bit closer to what we remember Clemson being during those dominant runs in the 2010s. But let's move on to the other team up top in the Florida State Seminoles. Are they the class of the ACC now, is the question that I have, and it would be solidified this upcoming year because Florida State's kind of a funny team heading into this year when you talk about all the hype around Miami, all the hype around Clemson kind of getting back up to the top. A team that went undefeated is probably not getting talked about quite enough as the Florida State team is right now. So I think I have worries about this team. I've been very open about that with DJ. Just don't feel overly confident in that offense running the way that they want it to. Doesn't change that the head coach has every ability to put him in really good spots. Mike Norvell has done an incredible job, no matter what quarterback he has, at making sure that kid is in winning situations. And that's the end-all be-all for DJ. When you look at what he can do this upcoming year, the talent is there. The arm talent is really, really incredible. He can run the ball. He can do a number of different things on the football field. He's got to be more consistent in the passing game when you talk about completion percentage. And Mike Norvell does a great job of that. Whether it's screen just to get him out of get the ball out of his hands very quickly, make sure he's getting a rhythm going. Whether it's quick slants that just make him feel really confident, or it's throwing it up to ridiculous wide receivers that can make pretty much any play on the field. He's gonna have plenty at his disposal. And I think when you look at this Florida State team, this is their chance to kind of plant their flag. This is their chance to show everyone in the ACC that this is their conference. It's no longer Clemson's. It's no longer anyone else's. Florida State State is right there in that conversation. And although last year was a huge moniker for that, and the last 2 years really were a huge moniker for that, this is the year where you really solidify that. And if you do something big this year, Clemson might have to dip into the portal to get to keep up with you with what they can do on the recruiting trail. So definitely will be an interesting thing to watch. I think the Noles know how important this upcoming season is, and we'll see if they can execute this upcoming season. But I want to get into Miami here for a second, and just curious if this is hype or all of this is really real. And I think when you talk about this team, everyone, I kind of dismiss this question because I do think they're real, and it's because of the guy on the screen right there. Cam Ward is an absolute monster. He immediately elevates your team the second he steps in on campus, and there's a reason he was picked ACC Player of the Year and made a lot of people mad. Let's just be totally honest. So it's definitely one of those things that he is an elite player, definitely will elevate this team at least a little bit. The question is how much. I do think the O-line has every ability to compete with any D-line that they're going to face. The running back duo is one of the best, probably the best in the conference. The wide receiver group might be the best in the conference as well. So you have tons of game changers on the offensive side of the ball, and then you got Ruben Bain on the defensive side. And that's a group that I think does need to come quite a long way this upcoming season. But when you have a game record like that, you feel pretty good about your chances on the defensive side of the ball. I do think my big-time worry about Miami going into this year is, frankly, Mario Cristobal. I do think he's a fantastic coach. I think he's going to have a really good year, but there have been some times in the past where he's been a little bit micromanaging. He's been a little bit kind of all over his play callers and not allowing them to really open the playbook that the way that they want to, and it's led to a couple losses, including that Georgia Tech loss a year ago where it got away from him. A lot of different things went wrong, and he made a lot of bad decisions in that game. So definitely will be a thing to watch throughout the season. They have all the pieces. All the talent level is definitely where it needs to be for them to compete for the ACC, win it, and possibly go to the playoffs. So everything is there. There's no two ways about that. You could miss the mark. There's no two ways about that either. But overall, I think when you look at this team, I tend to believe it's a little bit more real than hype, but it definitely could change very quickly in that Week 1 matchup against Florida. Then we go into how many teams can really win the conference outside of the three that I just talked about. We have Clemson, Florida State, and Miami. We know that they're setting the pace. We know that they are the best teams in this conference, and we know that they're the favorites to get into that conference championship. So the question is, how big is the gap between those three and everyone else? Is that, this monstrous gap that kind of feels like what's going on in the Big Ten right now with those four teams up top and everyone else? I don't necessarily think anyone outside of those four has a shot. I don't think that's the case in the ACC, though. I do have Virginia Tech in my title game, so obviously I don't think that. I do think someone like Kyron Jones can be a total difference maker for this team, but you have other teams as well. I think an NC State team that could put it together, particularly on the offensive side of the ball, but also they need some players on the defensive side of the ball. So definitely will be a really interesting thing to watch. All of these teams obviously have to have more go for them than the other teams on this list with Miami, Clemson, and Florida State. They have a little bit more wiggle room because of the talent level that they have, because of all of the ability they have all over the field. They don't necessarily have to worry about this quite as much, at least walking that tightrope that I talk about so much. So Virginia Tech and North Carolina State, they're walking a tightrope. There's no two ways about that. But they are two teams that I think if they can get it together, if they can put everything together the way that they want to, particularly with a guy like Kyron Jones at Virginia Tech or Grayson McCall at North Carolina State, I think they can absolutely get into the championship game and absolutely can make an effect on this conference this upcoming season. So overall, I think the big time question I have is, once they get there, can they really win that game? When the chips are down, can they play the way that they need to play against that elite offensive line for Clemson or elite offensive line for Miami or elite offensive line for Florida State? So that's kind of the big time difference. Is you're getting to the end of a 12-game season. You're playing that 13th game, and you're facing up against likely one of the most talented teams in your conference, and one that, particularly on the line of scrimmage, probably has a relatively sizable gap. Not necessarily anything crazy, but definitely one that will have an effect on this game. So that's the big time question, not can they get there, because I think there are plenty of teams that can get there, including SMU, I think, could possibly get there this upcoming year. But when the chips are down, they have to make a play. Can they handle the physicality of those three teams will definitely be something to watch as we get closer to that date. But let's get into the playoff, and let's talk about how many ACC teams can make the playoff. I think we just talked about the three up top. Miami, FSU, and Clemson already can absolutely make it to the playoff. There's no two questions about that. Now, there's a little bit of worry with that because Clemson plays Florida State. Florida State plays Clemson and Miami. Miami plays Florida State. So there's going to be a little bit of roughing themselves up here. And then Miami gets off a little bit nicely, only having to play Florida. Otherwise, that is really going to be a big time, probably a game that they're going to be in a little bit danger for. And then you have Florida State. They play Clemson, Florida, Miami, Notre Dame. Clemson plays UGA, Florida State, South Carolina. So there's plenty of games on these schedules that could trip up these three teams. I'd be a little bit surprised if it was these three teams that made it from the ACC, if three teams make it at all. I think there are some people that are saying it's only going to be the conference champion, and I totally understand that. I believe I had three teams in there from the ACC, and I already don't necessarily love it too much. I had Miami, Virginia Tech, and Florida State, so definitely will be a really interesting thing, and one of those things that Notre Dame could come into this conference and totally shake everything up. If they beat Florida State, then Florida State's in a really tough spot going forward. So it's definitely going to be one of those really interesting things to watch, and I think you have a number of different teams that can make some noise, but at the end of the day, it's really going to define, or what's going to define this is how the Big 12 plays out, how Notre Dame plays out. If they, become those dominant teams and the Big 12 has two 11-1 teams heading to their championship, it's likely that the ACC only gets one team in. Let's just be totally honest. But if Notre Dame struggles and they don't find their way in, or if the Big 12 is really cannibalistic and there's only one team that gets in from there, maybe the ACC has a door opening to be a two-team, three-team bid type conference, and definitely will be a really interesting thing to watch. But overall, I think you have tons of teams that could be playoff level. A couple of things have to go their way, but when you look at how many teams could really make it, I think one's probably where I would fall, maybe two. It's definitely one of those things that this will be defined more by what happens outside the ACC than probably what happens in it. So definitely will be a really interesting thing to watch there. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Thank you so much for tuning in. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have really incredible people covering everything you possibly want. So come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered on the world of sports. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.